welcome to another episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Another episode for this week that is, like I said on yesterday's episode of the show, you weren't going to have to wait too long for a second episode, and et voila, as they say. Basically, I had to take a couple of days off this week, so I kind of got all my chores and stuff out of the way early on, which has left the weekend free for, well, something a little bit more interesting and a bit more fun. So a second episode of the show for this week, and a first for the show in actual fact. This is the first time that I've ever had the opportunity to do an entire episode of the show on Hazelburn. So firstly, a big thank you to the distillery for 3 of the samples for today's episode of the show, and 3 samples that came from my good friend in Sunderland. So big thank you to both of you guys for that. And like I said, I mean, I've reviewed Hazelburn over the years several times, and I've done a rather large amount of episodes of the show on Springbank. I mean, partly because I like Springbank, and I know that the Springbank episodes of the show get lots of support, lots of views, and I hope that kind of encourages a few of you guys that maybe have never watched the show before to stick around and watch some other episodes of the show, which would be really, really cool. So I don't really need to tell you an awful lot about Hazelburn, apart from it's obviously the triple distilled spirit produced at Springbank. It essentially gets a first run through the wash stills, a blank run through low wine stills number 1, and then a final rectifying distillation through low wine stills number 2. Now, the interesting thing about this, and where it differs from, say, Auchentoshan, for example, Auchentoshan is generally, they take a very high cut and a very narrow cut, whereas at Springbank they basically take the same cut that they do when they are distilling the other spirits. So you end up with Auchentoshan with a sort of an ABV coming off the still somewhere around about 80%, whereas the Hazelburn comes off at the same ABV as Springbank itself at 63.6%. So although it's triple distilled, in my tastings of it, it has a little bit more flesh on the bones, shall we say, a bit more guts than Auchentoshan, whereas Auchentoshan is slightly more effete, shall we say, if you want that to use that kind of terminology, and Hazelburn is a little bit more of a bruiser, to be fair. Anyway, so I'm not being disingenuous to Auchentoshan. It's just lovely that although we have triple distilled spirits, they can be considerably different, and it's just one of those wonderful things about the whiskey industry. So like I said, don't really need to tell you an awful lot about the spirit itself, apart from what I'm going to be tasting today. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with a 10-year-old. This was a UK only single cask release. It was distilled in December of 2007, bottled in May of 2018, and bottled at 53.9%. So, interesting one to start off with. Now, next two are both distillery released 12-year-old Hazelburns. Now, the first one is a sample that was bottled in 2011, and the code was 11342, bottled at 46%, and the other bottling was 14/476, so bottled in 2014. And I don't know if you can really quite make out, but there's a marked difference in colour. But the sample of from 2011 is a lot lighter in colour than the sample from 2014. So looking at them straight away, I'm kind of inclined to believe a touch more sherry in the 2014 bottling. So it'll be interesting to find out if that is the case. The next bottling we'll be moving on to is a 20-year-old single cask. This was bottled for a German whiskey shop, a shop in Bremen, which I'm not really good. Well, I'm gonna, I'll try and pronounce it. I mean, I'll murder it. I know there's a load of you guys that probably that live in Germany that watch the show, so I would cover your ears now. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the first name of the shop because I haven't got a clue. But I believe the second name is Weinhandelsgesellschaft. I hope I've done a reasonable job of that, and like I said, it's a shop in Bremen. It was a refill bourbon cask, bottled of 55.5, distilled in May of 1998 and bottled in September of 2018, and probably one of the oldest bottlings of Hazelburn that I've actually come across. Then we're going to sort of kind of go back in age, but for obvious reasons, because this is the Hazelburn 8-year-old Sauternes Wood bottling. So 5 years in refill bourbon and 3 years finishing in Sauternes. Was distilled in 2002, bottled in February of 2001 at 55.9%, and over time the distillery has released a number of these wood finished bottlings which, shall we say, don't lack for intensity. So let's see what that one's all about. And the last bottling of the day is the only independent bottling sample that I have. It was called the Unpeated, bottled by another German whiskey shop called SCOMA. I believe is in a town city called Javert. Sounds almost French to me, doesn't it? It's probably not pronounced like that at all, and I've just murdered it, but there you go. So this is a single sherry cask, hence why it's at the end. Cask number 900, distilled in December of 2000, bottled in March of 2019 at 56.3%. And well, it's quite interesting because the bottle, the colour of the bottle on the title page looks inky black. I mean, and I'll tell you what, well, it's not inky black in reality, but I can tell you what, it's pretty bloody dark. So yeah, one for you sherry Springbank aficionados or one thinks. But anyway, we shall get there in due course, but we shall start with the 10-year-old single cask. Let's see what the nose gives us on that then, shall we? Right, okay, yeah, so let's see what the nose gives us on this end. The 10-year-old single cask. Recharred bourbon hogshead. Light, aromatic. What was I saying about it being a fairly weighty spirit? Certainly this particular bottling has more kind of in common with Auchentoshan. Although it doesn't have the sort of like the high tone Turkish delight character, it certainly has a lighter, more citric kind of character. Very lemony, sort of a little bit of sugar coating there as well. A touch on the confected side possibly, but not, I think, in an unpleasant sense. It's got that kind of almost kind of, to me, it sort of says sugar lemon bonbons kind of thing, you know. Oh God, that's going back some years. That is. There's a little bit of fish. There's some oiliness, some brininess, a little bit of gritty tannin. I mean, that's a lovely nose, really pretty complex. A little bit of malt as well, getting some almost kind of orangey sort of citric notes coming through now. I mean, that's, like I said, it's certainly quite light in character for an Hazelburn, but beautiful, it has to be said. Beautiful nose. Let's see what the pass like. Bit more weighty on the palate, fuller, bit more polished tannins. I mean, we're not talking about your rough, gritty tannins here, it has to be said. Really quite polished, quite, dare I say it, elegant. quite malty on the middle. Again, like I said, got a lovely fullness. That citric note is noticeable, and definitely there's some brine, some earth. It's a little grippy right at the very end, but you know what, I think that is a beautiful cask, it has to be said. Elegant, rounded, polished. You know, we're not talking your kind of gritty, fishy sort of Springbank here. We're talking elegance, and that was a lovely cask. So yeah, great one to start with. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the two 12-year-olds. This is, like I said, from 2011, so see what that nose gives us. Now that's more typical of Hazelburn. It's fuller, it's richer, it's oilier. It actually feels like it's got quite a lot of maturity to it. Certainly more maturity than I would expect at 12 years old. It's got that sort of intense oxidised white fruit, apricot, a little bit of banana skin, brine, really quite a lot of brine, really briny in actual fact, sort of almost kind of ozone-y briny in character, a little bit of chunky oak, a little bit of toasted caramel, just moving into the slightly burnt end of the caramel spectrum. A little bit of mature oak as well. I mean, I'm getting some sawdusty notes, which I would never have expected at 12 years of age. So it's kind of, like I said, it's giving me this impression of a lot more age. I mean, is it possible that there was, you know, maybe a few older casks that slipped into this particular batch? I don't know. I mean, it's not unheard of, certainly for Springbank to, certainly in the past, that they've vatted in older casks. I mean, you wouldn't catch them doing it now, considering what they could get for older Springbank. They wouldn't do that. But anyway, I mean, we are talking 10 years ago, and so it's a possibility. Anyway, let's see what the palate gives. Quite toffeed, or getting some of that gritty sherry notes on the finish. I would guess this is probably somewhere in the region of 80 to 90% American oak. The sherry component is very, very low. You know, really fishy, intense. It's got that kind of dried fruit, oxidised fruit, and again, it just feels a lot older than 12 years old. I mean, it's you know, the difference between the 10-year-old single cask and this one is kind of chalk and cheese almost. It's a little bit of tannin kind of coming through on the finish. Like I said, that sort of sherry tannin, a little bit of sherry dried fruit as well. But it's really complex, really full, really oily, and this to me is classic Hazelburn, it has to be said. Right, okay, so let's move on to the second of the 12-year-olds. So this one comes from 2014. Right, yeah, definitely more sherry on the nose. It's got that sort of herbal, vegetal kind of sherry note. Not sulphurous, vegetal. It's almost more boiled sweets. The oak is grittier, the tannins are more noticeable, the dried fruit is there. There's a little bit of barley, a little bit of honey, but there's less of the intrinsic spirit character. It's still got that classic Hazelburn, oily, robust character. Again, I wouldn't, I mean, maybe 30% sherry. I mean, I know sherry can often sort of punch well above its weight, but it's not as, it's reasonably dark, but you know, it's obviously noticeably more sherry than the previous bottling, and just a little bit dampened, should we say, by the additional sherry, but it's not wholly unbalanced, so that's good. Let's see what the balanced like. Now it certainly doesn't taste as mature as the previous bottling, so maybe this is more like what Hazelburn is like at 12 years old. Sherry kind of comes through more on the finish. It kicks off with the American oak, not so caramel, fresher. There's a nice balance between the sort of apricot and the citrus. There's some briny notes as well. Quite woody, chewy, malty finish. And like I said, the sherry's coming through more on the finish. A little bit of dried fruit, not quite so intense, thankfully. And stylistically, it's sitting somewhere between the 10 and the previous 12-year-old. So again, interesting. Personally preferred the previous bottling, but still a lovely whiskey nevertheless. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 20-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Again, we're in the more kind of higher toned end of the spectrum. So we're closer in style to the 10-year-old than we are to the 12. It's got an almost grain whiskey kind of feel to it. It's quite high toned, quite grainy. There's a lot of grippy tannin, a bit of toffee, ice cream, quite fruity. I mean, it's got that lovely sort of citric. It's got character. It's got an element of nuts, dried apricot, toasted almond. I mean, the oak is really now coming through. I mean, that's developing kind of nicely. I mean, that's a lovely oak character. A touch dominant maybe, but I like its kind of progression. You know, you give it a bit of aeration and, you know, you come back to the higher toned kind of notes. That is that's a very, very impressive bottling. Well, those Germans know how to pick a cask, it has to be said. I mean, that's very, very good. And I love how the way it develops in the glass, and that, to me, that's the mark of a great whiskey. If, you know, it doesn't just stay the same. Like I said, you could argue it's getting a little bit oaky, but let's see what that's like. Well, that's got a lovely spicy flourish at the end. So again, quite restrained, quite grain-like again, slightly high-toned, palate kind of mirroring the nose, more like the 10-year-old single cask. Not quite so oaky, a little bit of drying tannins, grilled nuts, butter. Nice spiciness, nice wood spice on the finish. Lovely intensity. Again, like I said, this is kind of following on more in the footsteps of the single cask 10-year-old with that slightly higher toned, lighter character, less kind of rich and oily. But stunning. I mean, absolutely gorgeous. And it just, I mean, I would say Hazelburn is kind of overlooked, but it ain't these days. I mean, I used to be able to put it on the shelf. Doesn't happen these days at all. I mean, with everybody obviously scrambling for the interesting, sexy stuff, kind of people have kind of worked their way down. So pressure's now on the 10-year-old. I mean, literally the only bottling that will go onto the shelf these days is the long row no age statement, which I think is criminal because it's just such a bloody good bottling. But you know, anyway, we're not going to talk about that because that has nothing to do with me. And of course, obviously, as you well know, any comments I make are mine and mine only, and nothing to do with you know who. Thought I'd better get that in. The disclaimer, as they say. Because we're about to move on to the sherry cask. Well, actually we're not. Before we get to the sherry cask, I better do the Sauternes Wood. Getting a bit ahead of myself there. Anyway, so yeah, this is in the wood finishes range, and was released in sort of around about April of 2011. Let's see what the nose goes. Right, okay, so there are whiskies that use Sauternes finishing. There's a fair amount of them. Tomatin, for example, Tom in Tool, two fairly recent ones, and the Sauternes kind of gives it that sort of soft, kind of honeyed, late harvested, winey character. Oh, this is dark. This is dark. This is intense. This is grippy. Dried grape, leafy. It's kind of, you can just smell the wood. I mean, you know. I mean, it's cask dominated, obviously. It's coffee, mocha, burnt sugar, caramelized banana, cinnamon, salt, fish. I mean, that is intense. That's kind of grabbing you by the watsits. I mean, all right, it's not quite so mad as that. That Longrow Barolo finish, which was kind of the most bizarre car crash I think I've ever kind of tasted. But that's just the thing about the Springbank wood finishes. They ain't soft and fluffy. They are intense and natural. I mean, there's no off notes there at all. There's nothing to sort of get kind of worked up. There's no sulphur, no anything like that. But I mean, yeah, I'm getting a bit of peat. I mean, peat? Where the hell does that come from? I mean, you know, Hazelburn is completely unpeated, but I'm definitely getting peat, almost sort of oily. I mean, yes, Campbelltown, malty, earthy peat. Yes, definitely. Now I've noticed it, I just can't stop smelling it. I mean, it's kind of like, ooh. Anyway, yeah. So that's an incredible nose, as we said, and yeah, it's 55.9%, but that alcohol is really well contained. It's certainly not assaulting the nasal passages, shall we say, and good job, because I really don't have enough left there to put a little drop of water with. Anyway, let's see what the parts are. Rich, gritty, grapey, dark. I mean, this is not your soft and fluffy kind of Sauternes finish. This is your intense, lick the inside of the barrel, woody kind of Sauternes finish. Smoky, earthy, peaty. I mean, where the hell is this peat coming from? I mean, I'm not imagining it. I can bloody well taste it. I can tell you that for a start. Big, grapey, not a huge amount of distillery character or spirit character, I should say. There's a little bit of dried fruit. You kind of search for it and you can think, well, there's a little bit of dried fruit, there's a little bit of high-toned notes there, there's a little bit of sort of slight floralness, but the reality is it's pretty much all cask orientated. But that's a hell of a lot of fun, it has to be said. I mean, yeah, okay, I can forgive it being sort of like almost, well, not totally one-dimensional, but you know, the flavours and the aromas are pretty much all coming from the same place. But even so, doesn't lack for intensity. Right, okay, so now we're going to get on to the sherry cask. So this is the other German bottling, 18 years old. Oh, okay, let's have a look. Pruny, winey, dark sherried fruit, armagnac-y kind of notes, polished wood, spice, leather. Absolutely no spirit character whatsoever. Those of you that love your sherried Springbank will be wetting yourself over this, it has to be said. It's a monster. It is big, it's sherried, it's kind of, you could say, well, it does what it says on the tin, and well, you can't argue with that. But it just lacks the balance. I mean, you know, yes, all right, I can tell it's a Campbelltown spirit. It's got the fishiness, it's got the brininess. At the end of the day, it's kind of it has Campbelltown stamped all over it. But you know, you wouldn't have known it was a Hazelburn. It could have been a Springbank. It's obviously no peat, so it's obviously not a long row. But you know, it's clean sherry. You know, no sulphur, no dirtiness, thankfully. But anyway, let's see what Pal gives. Well, would you be surprised if I said it's very heavily sherried? Well, duh. Yeah. So, dried fruit, prunes, armagnac-y kind of notes. It's got a pleasant maturity to it. Walnut, spice, touch of pepper. A lot of pepper in actual fact on the finish. Dates, dried fruit, little bit of fishiness. Again, all sherry, no distillery character, absolutely zero, zilch, none. I mean, it's nothing, absolutely nothing. I mean, I could, you know, yes, again, like on the nose, I could tell it was the Campbelltown malt, but given that everything is all wood derived, you wouldn't know where that spirit actually came from. Let's see if a little drop of water does anything. It doesn't really need it, to be bluntly honest with you. I mean, yes, so you can taste the or sense the alcohol content on the finish. It gives, kind of emphasises the spices a little bit. Bit of burnt wood now, maybe. Possibly a little bit more aromatic. Maybe a little bit of distillery character. Maybe I'm searching for it. Maybe it's kind of tricking me, lulling me into a false sense of security that it has some complexity other than the sherry. Ooh, is that a bit harsh? Yeah, citrus peel. Yeah, I'm certainly getting orange peel now. Anyway, let's see what Pal's on now. It's a bit bland, a bit watery. Like I said, didn't really need water. Don't know why I put kind of a drop of water with it. Just out of pure curiosity, to be bluntly honest with you. And in fact, I had enough left in the glass to do so, but yeah, didn't really do it a huge amount of favours. Yeah, so there you go. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. So, like I said, big thank you to my good friend in Sunderland for 3 of the samples, and a big thank you to the distillery for the other 3 samples. Your support is very much appreciated. So the 10-year-old single cask, well, that was lovely. I mean, like I said, it was in the more higher tone, slightly moving more towards the Auchentoshan sort of style of triple distilled, whereas when we looked at both the 2 12-year-olds, you know, ignoring the fact that the second bottling from 2014 had a little bit more sherry than the previous, the first bottling, which I thought was absolutely stunning. That to me kind of showcased what sort of Hazelburn really is all about. But then we come down to sort of like the 20-year-old, and the 20-year-old single cask is suddenly sort of following in the footsteps of the 10-year-old. Again, lighter, more high tone, more citrus. Again, a beautiful whiskey, and it just goes to show how single casks of any particular whiskey, any particular distillery can often throw you a curveball, be completely different to the distillery release, and this is part of the fun of single casks. The Sauternes finish, like I said, kind of classic sort of distillery wood finish. It not soft and fluffy by any stretch of the imagination. It's kind of rough. No, rough is wrong. No, it's not rough. It's woody. It's intense. It's like I said, it was almost like licking the inside of a Sauternes cask. Not that I've done that, but it kind of gave me that kind of impression, it has to be said. And the SCOMA 18-year-old, well, could have been any bloody age as far as I could see, to be honest with you. It was all about the sherry. And like I said, if you're that kind of way inclined, you'll love it. If you're, follow my kind of train of thought, then it didn't really sort of exhibit the complexity and the balance that I would have personally liked. But as we say, each to his own. And I thought this was a really intriguing tasting, and it's certainly the first time that I've ever tasted 6 samples of Hazelburn all in one go. So learning curve for me as well. Anyway, you'll be pleased or saddened, or maybe that to know that this is going to be the last episode of the show for this week. I won't be doing another one this week, funnily enough. So all there's left to say is good Dram and good afternoon.